Was the civil rights movement a communist front movement? J.
Ooh!
Edgar Hoover was asking that question back in the 1950s,
Hello,
1960s.
somebody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Quisha King Show, where we discuss faith, culture, and politics, all geared towards the next generation.
Ladies and gentlemen,
This time.
Are you ready to get down?
ladies and gentlemen,
So, what happens when your heroes let you down? Making mistakes are certainly a part of life we all face from time to time. But when someone presents themselves as one thing, but are truly another, are you able to reconcile who they are, who you know them to be now? Most of us would like to think that we can, but what if that person is someone like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? As teachers all over the nation are preparing their Black History Month lessons, King, no doubt, will be a part of the conversation. I've been reading some surprising views that Dr. King had that really surprised me and will likely surprise you too. Recently, Governor DeSantis rejected an AP African American Studies course that contained critical race theory and, interestingly, queer theory. That certainly seems odd for an AP African American history course, don't you think? Here to discuss why queer theory, which is contained within the LGBTQ agenda, has been tied to the Civil Rights Act and communism tied to the Civil Rights Act from the very beginning, is political commentator and teacher Chuck Littleton, who also goes by Teach 'em Chuck. Welcome.
How you doing? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We had the opportunity to be on the same panel with Chad O. Jackson, who is a part of the Uncle Tom series, documentary series, which is a phenomenal series. And I actually was following you already before we were on that panel because I had come across your deep dives into communism and socialism and how it's been creeping in. It has crept into so many different social agendas and social
Mhm.
justice things that I certainly didn't know that it was in certain things like the civil rights movement.
Right.
So I thought you would be a really great person to discuss this with. So thanks.
Man, no problem. No problem.
So
See,
why don't
try
you
to,
tell us a little bit of background, like, where you from? How'd you get involved in this?
well, I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Still live in the area, but I'm in the suburbs now, thank God. Middle-aged man, married, 4 kids. I certainly wouldn't want to subject my children to those, to that element, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you'd have to be a fool to want to raise your children in a place like that. But yeah, that's where I'm from. Um, Not a whole lot of, hullabaloo as far as my background is concerned. I was just one of those people who, just sat around and had, these sorts of conversations in private circles with friends and family and whatnot. And
Mhm.
for years I had always heard people in my ear saying, "Yo, man, you should do this. Why don't you?" But prior to my advent on Instagram, which began maybe I'd say 2.5 years ago,
Mhm.
I had no social media presence whatsoever, right? So I came with,
Wow.
you know, when I went to college, a couple of years after I began college in 2002 is when Facebook and MySpace at the time, all that stuff really began to like take off.
Yeah.
We had like Black Planet and stuff,
Right.
all right,
Yeah.
but in the little AOL chat rooms or whatnot. But I was never a social media guy, right? I always kind of had that my conspiratorial antennas were up because I
Really?
never really,
Okay.
right? I never felt comfortable with just being online for the world to see. Like,
Okay.
why would I want, my name associated with my face out in the
Mm.
public so that people who don't know me personally could, right, readily identify me? I always thought
Yeah.
that was kind of strange, right? So in the back of my mind, or in the front of my mind, as a matter of fact, I always thought that social media was this, you know, uh, operation hell bent on grooming the public in terms of getting them used to having their lives constantly surveilled. And so I
Mm.
always thought that was a big brother kind of a bait and switch thing happening. So I always stayed away from social media.
Well,
And
I think you were spot on considering everything that we've seen with Twitter and these Twitter files and all the government just completely I mean, it might as well be like, government Twitter because they have
right.
totally like taken
Well, yeah.
well, before Elon, yeah, they had totally like taken it over. So you were spot on.
Yeah, that was just kind of, I was just like, I don't want to do that. Post some pictures. Hey, look at me. I'm here. I'm there. It's like,
Right.
nah. But then, a buddy of mine had asked me if I wanted to start podcasting, which, everybody sort of started doing over the past couple of years. And I was like, all right, man, let's go. Right. So we started it. And then he said, man, well, if you're going to start doing this podcast thing with me, man, you need an Instagram page. I said, I gotta have an Instagram page, man. And slowly but surely, I started the Instagram page begrudgingly,
Mm-hmm.
and started, posting little things here and there, and the ball started rolling, and here I am.
Here
I'm
you
just a
are.
guy. I'm just a guy with an Instagram page, and now all of a sudden, I'm bumping into people like you, and I've become acquainted with, Chad O. Jackson and some other folks, and you know, here I am talking to you.
That's
Yeah.
quite an interesting story. So would you consider yourself a conservative
Yes.
politically? Okay.
Yeah.
So were you always a conservative or
No.
so
No.
what's the story? I always I say if you're black and conservative, usually there's a story. So what's
Yeah.
yours?
Yeah. But yeah, there's a story. Well, I've said this story before, so I guess I'll tell it again. It's something, or it's eerily similar to what happened to the late Sir Roger Scruton. I don't know if you know who Roger Scruton is. He was a famous public intellectual. It's British or English, or I forgot how they how
Uh-huh.
they break themselves up. It's like you got England, you got the UK, and then there's Britain, but they're not all the same. I don't
Yeah.
know. But anyway, yeah, I heard him tell a story one time of campus life in 1968 when he was in college. I don't know what phase of his college life he was into at the time, but of course, in 1968, you had the World Revolution, as it was called, and
Mhm.
there were mass uprisings all across Europe and the United States, right? Seemingly around the same time, right? Kind of
Mhm.
like wink, wink, right? What is really going on here? Is
Mm.
there an international conspiracy afoot? Perhaps, and we'll probably
Mhm.
get into that.
Uh-huh.
But Roger Scruton, at the time, he said that he was a young man. He didn't quite know what he believed politically, but at the time, with the student protests and everything that was going on at the time, and they were, rioting, destroying property, turning over cars, cursing administration and cops and what have you. And he sat back and he looked, and he said that's the moment he became a conservative, because he said to himself, he said, I don't know what I believe, but whatever it is, it's the opposite of what they believe, right?
Right.
And so that sort of started my journey back when the Ferguson riots,
Mhm.
right,
Mhm.
broke out. And I said to
So
myself,
Ferguson, that
that
was
was Michael Brown,
Mike. Okay, hands up, don't shoot. Okay.
hands up, don't shoot.
Yep.
And I said, wait a minute. Now, if you want to get the police, right, out of your, you know, if you think that the police are being, too heavy-handed or whatever, you
Mhm.
want more
Mhm.
freedom. They're sort of like this uh, Gestapo-like force in your community. Well, then, in order for you to get the um, the kind of space, so to speak, to breathe that you claim you want, then you must first display some modicum of decency.
Right.
Because if you uh, misbehave, then all you're going to do is incur the ire of the state, because you've
Right.
uh, showed the world that you are in fact ungovernable.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't
Mm-hmm.
going to get you what you want, because no matter how righteously indignant you are, you do not have the moral right to carry on in this manner.
Right.
Something is wrong here.
Yeah.
Something is wrong with that. And even if at the time I bought into a lot of the prevailing myths surrounding policing, I knew that a decent person, regardless of how justified you feel as though you are to be angry,
Mm-hmm.
you don't act like that.
That's right.
And so I said, wait a minute, I had to pull back for a second. And I started to analyze and realize, and then that's really what sparked the journey. And
Wow.
then my interest in politics really began to take off when after President Trump came down the escalator, as we like to say. But that's sort of like when I became sort of consciously a conservative, because I
Mhm.
began to, for the first time in my life, understand not just government, but understand life in a way that I had never thought about it before. Prior
Mm.
to that, don't get me wrong, now I was into, like, philosophy and theology and politics and history and all of that stuff, but
Mhm.
more so from I can't necessarily say a leftist perspective, even though
Uh-huh.
I did have some left-wing leanings that I was not conscious of at the time. I guess I would have been considered a youthful idiot, to quote Vladimir Lenin. But I had a
Mhm.
more nihilistic attitude towards life, in that I didn't really know what I believed in, because I really didn't believe in anything, because I
Mm.
thought that everything that it was all just this big scam, and that there was,
Yeah.
nothing in life worth holding on to, because
Mm.
everything was just this grand old conspiracy to keep the masses down and keep us
Yeah.
oppressed and everything. I mean, but
Well, I mean, you were
that all
you
began to
were
change.
definitely still on the right track, even with that.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, exactly. But my solutions and my overall, it was just, I was just this one young, confused, psychological mess at the time. But couldn't have you couldn't tell me that back then. I thought, I thought I was sharp as, I thought I was sharp as a whip. But
Well,
yeah.
uh, uh, so when if before you get saved, like if you are a believer, I am, and we talked before, you
Hmm.
are too. Um, Before you get saved, a lot of times you take that same type of zeal and zealous that you had when before you knew Christ, you bring it into you bring it into the same thing. Like nobody's ever going to say, well, Keisha wasn't feisty and a little bit kind
Hmm.
of. I'm still the same person. It's just like now my zeal is over here. So it's like I can definitely. It's very rare that I see somebody become like their personality kind of changes. When you
Hmm.
come into new information, you
Right.
just you bring that same type of thing. So I could because your videos are very in depth. Like that's not something you just that's like who you are. Like I can tell like these are you
Hmm.
like to read and study and
Hmm.
really know what you're talking about and really get to like who are these people actually. And first of all, doing that at all is a very rare thing you see people do. um I always say like nerding out. You kind of like nerd out on something, like you just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
consume all this stuff. And but yeah, I certainly can see you being that way before and carrying it into what you do today. So the world certainly though is better that you are doing these deep dives because it opens up so much information
Hmm.
that even things that I like to nerd out on that I might not necessarily have known with the topics that you're doing. It's very helpful
Yeah.
to bring these things to light. So the world needs it. So please keep it up.
I am. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a gift and a talent and a skill in and of itself to really just sit there and read or listen and to dedicate hours and upon hours. And it's weird because even some people can do it or engage in the act, but walk away not fully being able to comprehend exactly what they just came across.
Right.
And so it takes a certain type of person to be able to understand it and probably communicate it in a way that's palatable, a way that makes sense to people. Because it's not as simple as just going and reading it or going to look up something. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of fortitude, um,
It,
a
it,
lot of
it
patience,
does.
because it's not, you have to really love, you have to love it, you have to like to do it.
Hmm.
Again, not gonna bore everybody and go off into my whole background, but I was the guy in his early 20s that if I was sitting around the house bored with nothing to do, I may not have had a ton of money, but I would just go to like a Barnes and Noble bookstore, and I would just walk around the bookstore, and I would stand in the aisles and pick something off the shelf, and
Yeah.
I would just read the book and just stand there for a couple hours, read a few,
Wow.
read a chapter or so, put it back, move on to the next one. I actually enjoyed,
Hmm.
right, learning. To me, I thought it was fun because this was
Yeah.
like, it was
Let me
better
ask you
than,
this while you're
yeah.
talking about what kind of student were you? Did you go to a public school?
Yeah, I went to public schools all my life.
How
You
was
know,
that?
uh, well, I mean, it was a breeze. It was extremely easy from
Hmm.
K through 8. I could just show up, and I was always one of the smartest kids in the class. High 3.8s, 4.0s, and that always on the honor roll. But then when I got to high school, all of that changed, and
Hmm.
you know, get that teen angst thing sort of
Hmm.
happening. And I went to the high school that I went to was called Cass Tech High School.
Hmm.
It's probably known, it's known for its academic um, the stature, in the
Hmm.
in the state of Michigan, but it's becoming a national sort of powerhouse in terms of sports, particularly football. So if you say Cass Tech, I think Cass Tech High School's football team, I think they may have had a couple of games air on ESPN over the past few years.
Okay.
But it's an advanced level. You have
Hmm.
to take a test and everything to get in. And so I got in, and once I got there, I was just kind of going with the flow. And
Yeah.
again, not focused, rebelling against this and that. Thought I knew more than my teachers did,
Hmm.
and so that's when my grades really began to tank when I got to high
Hmm.
school. But yeah,
I
and
was
then
asking because a lot of smart kids tend to struggle in the typical public school set or in the classroom setting because your our minds are just not we're not wired that way. Like I know for me, like I was not at the end. I did better because I was like, okay, I gotta get it together because
yeah,
I need to get up out of here and try to go to college and do something. But it was just really tough for me just to focus and pay attention. It was like just a snooze. Like I was like, oh my god, I
yeah,
can't wait to get up out of here. But I was reading, excuse me, this man, his name is John Taylor Gatto. He resigned on the in the op-ed pages of the Washington or the Wall Street Journal, and just totally ripping public education and saying how it was it was just a sham, and how kids were just being held back and their natural talents and potential just wasn't being fostered. And it just that led me on a deep dive about the public education system and where it all came from and all those things. So that's why I was curious about, just a little peek into how your mind works and the things that you're interested in. I don't see, well, certainly the public schools that I went to, or schools that I have seen how they work, that just it didn't seem like it wouldn't have been a conducive situation for somebody like you. I don't think.
no, it wasn't. It wasn't. And
Yeah.
then again, got to college, and I just was skating by, and then once I started getting towards the end of earning my undergraduate degree is when I really said, okay, enough is enough. Stop playing around. And I finally made the dean's list and did all that stuff. But I
Wow.
just I was just coasting, just
Yeah.
coasting, not really, yeah. And then, dealing with all the things that you deal with as far as public education in the inner city, right? Not the
Mm-hmm.
best environment,
Mm-hmm.
at least when I was a kid coming up in the 90s, there were some behavioral standards and there were guidelines and certain things. I mean, we all knew what it meant if you rode the short yellow bus, right? We
Right.
always knew it was the one, what we called them the LD class, the learning disabilities class, where,
Right.
they'd have to hold hands going to the bathroom or
Yeah.
whatever. And we knew who those kids were. We knew who kids
Yeah.
were who had behavioral problems, and they
Mm-hmm.
separated them from the rest of us.
Yeah.
But due to, again, this progressive march, we've gotten to the point where even the children in these environments, unfortunately, who want to learn, um, it's tough for them
Yeah.
for a multitude of reasons, and
Yeah.
it's sad. It really is.
Yeah, well, they're about to get a whole dose of it. Coming up February 1st, starts
Yeah,
Black History Month, and we're about to be inundated
yeah,
with the usuals. Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks. Funny enough, they rarely ever include Booker T. Washington, who is one of my favorites. Rarely, and they do a little Frederick Douglass. It's a little bit of Frederick Douglass.
right.
Um, they definitely don't do Thomas Sowell. You're not getting any Walter Williams.
Nope.
It's really unfortunate. But I was watching one of your videos, and you were talking about how communism had infiltrated the Civil Rights Act.
Mhm.
And you were also talking about the LGBTQ. So, can you, just starting with communism, let's start there first.
Mhm.
How did that get into the Civil Rights Act?
Well, it's kind of difficult to find that genesis, that true beginning.
Okay.
If you go back to, I mean, the 1910s, right? I mean,
Mhm.
when we talk about communism in America, as far as a political entity is concerned, the Communist Party in America was founded in 1919, right? This was 2 years or approximately 2 years after the Russian Revolution of 1917. Now, there had been pro-socialist elements in the United States going all the way back to the 1800s.
Mhm.
And there was some, socialist so-called communities. There was one famous socialist community in a city in Indiana. The name of the city escapes me. But when you look at the origin of the Communist Party in the United States, it was founded, of course, in the city of Chicago, right? And this is, of course, the political home of none other than Barack Hussein Obama. But there were,
Mm.
of course, there were two communist parties in Chicago, and they would come together in 1920 to come under one banner, which was, of course, the Communist Party USA, CPUSA. And so when you,
Just really quick, and that was around the time when the Frankfurt School came over to the United States too, right?
well, the Frankfurt School, I'm trying to the exact year that the Frankfurt School was founded escapes me, but it was some point in the 1920s, probably like the mid. No, I will say this: it was around about 1922, 1923. So
Right.
you're
That's
you're
what I
right,
thought.
right about correct, because the basis of the Frankfurt School, their whole sort of program, their mission statement, so to speak, can be summed up in an essay written by a man named Karl Krosch. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce his last name. I can pull him up real fast because I have my my computer, my laptop out in front of me. But he wrote an essay entitled "Marxism and Philosophy." and that became the basis of the Frankfurt School. Yes, that's his name, Karl Krosch. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that last name. He was a German, and my German isn't isn't the best, considering
Okay,
the fact that I
course,
don't speak German at
course.
all.
Okay,
But yes,
got it.
this article was published in 1923, and that sort of became the what do you call it, the mission statement of the Institute for Social Research at Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so initially, you see a lot of people when they think about the civil rights movement, and they remember the names, and they remember some of the pivotal events that took place, and they remember a lot of the taglines and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the talking points, right? Well, if you go back again to the 1920s and 1930s, you will hear the exact same talking points being bandied about by people who were believed to be linked to the Communist Party or who were outright members of the Communist Party, because the talking points of the civil rights movement came from them, right? They just
Woo!
came about
Chuck,
decades later.
you're gonna piss some people off. I'm telling you, they are not gonna like this. They're not
Right.
gonna like this. But you gotta, you either want truth or you
Mm-hmm,
want the lie. So continue. But so those of you who are, I can just, I know already it's starting to, bother your spirit. And how dare he? This is
mm-hmm,
gonna help you. This is going to help you. So
mm-hmm.
just learn, just learn the truth. Continue.
And so I'm just hope don't mind me if I look off for a second.
No, you're
I
good.
just have my computer out here in front of me. So just as an example, in 1936, you had in Chicago once again the what was called the NNC, the National Negro Congress, started in 1936, held their first um, event in Chicago, and it was actually written about by Richard Wright. I don't know if you all are familiar with Richard Wright, the
I know the
famous
name. I
novelist,
know the name.
African American novelist, who was at one point. Now I don't know if Richard Wright was a card carrying, as they say, card carrying member of the Communist Party, or if
Mm-hmm.
Richard Wright was merely what they call a fellow traveler or an associate of the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
But Richard Wright was once pro-Soviet. He wrote about the meeting, and to Richard Wright's credit, he would go on. He would later on down the line, I can't remember the exact year, but he would abandon his communist views and come out staunchly against it. And you can read about that in his work entitled "The God That Failed." But Richard Wright, back in 1936, wrote about the first National Negro Congress, and his work was published in a publication called New Masses. New Masses. If you look up New Masses was one of the biggest communist publications in the country, and they wrote about this. And so again, going all the way back to the 1920s, 1930s, communists have always been behind the scenes when it came to this push for racial justice or social justice and all these various things, because communism, as it was envisioned, of course, by Vladimir Lenin, was the only sort of political and social and economic system that could liberate people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were against the communist movement, then that meant you were against Black progress. And
Wow.
those two things went hand in hand. And this is what,
Mm-hmm.
the communist agitprops in the United States would openly say in their own writings and their own publications.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came to like the civil rights movement, and of course, you could probably look at the civil rights movement and say, well, it probably began in 1955 with the summer bus boycott,
Right.
perhaps, and probably started in 1955. And you can say symbolically it ended with King's assassination in 68.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1956, would mark a key moment in the so-called civil rights movement when Martin Luther King Jr. would meet up with a man by the name of Stanley Levison.
I've heard that name.
Stanley Levison, and that was around the same time when Dr. King met a man by the name of Bayard Rustin, that I know a lot of you are familiar with. Bayard Rustin,
Yeah.
he joined the Young Communist League back in 1936, 1938.
Wow.
He was an actual, a member of a offshoot communist organization. He would leave the Communist Party officially, Bayard Rustin, once he learned about once he learned about the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression pact, when Stalin and Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, and that teed off a lot of pro-Soviet communists here in the United States. They said, how can you join up with a guy like Hitler? But I guess that's a whole other story, and we may revisit it later on in the conversation. But yeah.
Well, communists, they'll team up with whomever they think can advance their cause. They have no respect of person, no respect of anything. It's whomever that can advance their cause. They are, they're that dedicated, no matter what you are, what you believe, or there's kind of like no standard other than, are you a communist?
and they courted Dr. King intensely. They had their crosshairs on him. And let me say that I'm not saying this to excuse Dr. King, to say he was a pawn in some bigger scheme or some bigger game that he didn't quite fully understand. He knew very well who he was and what he believed in. He had these so-called democratic socialist beliefs for a long time. This was known. This has been written about extensively. It hasn't been talked about quite often, but it's written about. It's written about, as a matter of fact, by a lot of left-wing scholars who use Dr. King's radicalism to justify their radicalism, because Dr. King is a respected man in American culture, right? He's sort of like, he is this icon. He is the moral exemplar of the 20th century. And if Dr. King was this radical, then perhaps there isn't anything wrong with these Marxian notions and beliefs after all. So this is exactly what they do. But Dr. King was always a radical. He was a radical in terms of his politics, and he was also a radical in terms of his theology.
Yes, he
so
was.
He knew exactly who he was and who he was affiliated with. But he, publicly, because see, Dr. King was this guy. He could give respectability again to the so-called movement, right? Communists refer to this as their popular front tactic. And Dr. King really began to come into his radicalism more openly, I would say, around about 1967, when he participated in what was known as Vietnam Week. The long of it, let me think about what it was called. It was called, because I jotted some things down in preparation for our talk. It was called the Spring Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam in 1967. Dr. King would speak during that event. It was this coast to coast, from the West Coast to the East Coast, unified, as they called it, mobilization effort to try and end the war in Vietnam. And you had literally hundreds of groups come together to protest the war. And there was one individual in particular who was closely connected to Dr. King, who was involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he was this intense anti-war activist by the name of James Bivell. And at that time as well, Dr. King was beginning to cultivate a relationship with none other than the communist atheist known as Stokely Carmichael. There's a I actually have the transcript here right next to me of the conversation when Dr. King invited Stokely Carmichael to Ebenezer Church, because Dr. King had told Stokely that at this time, I am going to now begin to speak out openly against the war in Vietnam. So this began to really
Wow.
bring together the elements of Dr. King and the more overt, right, elements of what we call Black power or Black liberation. They knew that King, I'm sorry, I don't mean to take, but I'm gonna pass it back to you, but they knew King could sell it more. King could sell it
Mhm.
better because, King was more sly and manipulative in his words and in his language and in his presentation and appearance.
That it almost reminds me of, the Margaret Sanger tactic.
Hmm.
Like let's give it to the past. Let's sell this abortion idea let's give it to the pastors. They can speak well, they're in front of all these people, and if it's coming from them, then
Hmm.
it's going to be much more palatable, for the rest of the Black folk.
Yeah.
So, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, like wow. So I was under the impression that he was that it didn't start he didn't really start out kind of as with these ideas, but I guess you kind of say that like he was kind of groomed into it, if you will. But I thought it was probably something that he came to later on in life, like later on, meaning like nearer towards near his assassination.
Well, I mean, well, as far as his, how can I put it? So I'll go here because you sent me a couple of articles to read. I read the Virgil Hill piece and I read the Chad O. Jackson piece,
Mhm.
and I like some of the things that Chad O. Jackson and Virgil brought up.
Mhm.
You spoke about the church, and in Virgil Walker's piece was the quote from Booker T. Washington. I'll just read it. I love this. I love this quote from Booker T. Washington.
Yeah.
This is out of course, Booker T. Washington's famous book, Up from Slavery.
Yes.
Booker T says that the ministry was the profession that suffered the most and still suffers, though there have been great improvement, an account of not only ignorant, but in many cases immoral men who claimed that they were called to preach.
Yep.
In the earlier days of freedom, almost every colored man who learned to read would receive a call to preach. It's in air quotes.
Mhm.
Within a few days after learning how to read. Now, this is now, I don't,
Yeah.
the tone was, I laughed a lot. I said, okay, I think Booker T. Washington had a bit of sense of humor. He says that these guys received the call to preach shortly after just learning how to read. All of a sudden, they
Yeah.
wanted to become preachers. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
And he was clear. He was like, that is never gonna be me.
Right,
Yeah, he was
right,
like, no, I'm not doing that.
right. But see, King, even before he became what he became, he had these ideas of these social justice or these social gospel
The
uh,
liberation theology.
ideas,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
His main theological influence was Walter Rauschenbusch.
Yes. Yes.
Walter Rauschenbusch, the so-called ideological founder of the social gospel. And so Dr. King, for a while, again, not to get into his heterodox beliefs in terms of his Christianity, but he was, of course, what one would consider a more liberal or left-wing pastor.
Yeah.
And the Communist Party always courted the pastor, right? They courted particularly when they began to shift
Yeah.
their strategy when it came to the clergy, because of course communism is this militantly atheistic movement. There,
Mhm.
uh, Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, and
Mhm.
the head brass with amongst the Bolsheviks started a more select group of Bolsheviks that they referred to as the League of the Militant Godless. If you once again, if you want to know, that was that was the name of the group, right? You can't get more
Explicit.
anti
Yeah.
than this.
That's
Yeah, that's
explicit.
putting it frankly, right? I mean, Vladimir
Right.
Lenin wasn't Vladimir Lenin wasn't playing with y'all. He told you all
Wow.
exactly how he felt
Yeah.
about religion. But then, fast forward to 1920s, 1930s, they began to shift. And of course, they said, well, instead of taking on the church, particularly the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church throughout the history of communism, the Catholic Church has been the biggest hurdle for the communist movement, truth be told. Now, I know the Catholic Church gets a lot of flack, but
Yeah.
the Catholic Church has been, of course, infiltrated as well. But my point is that they began to shift, and they began to, and you can probably jot this down if you like. They began to engage in a strategy of what they call the outstretched hand. The outstretched hand. This was the brainchild of a man by the name of Earl Browder. Earl Browder was the head of the Communist Party USA at the time. And the purpose and the goal of the outstretched hand was, of course, to primarily take union workers, right? Because, communists are really heavily involved in all these labor movements, take the Catholic workers and convince them that, hey, even though I know, yeah, Marx and Lenin, they said all these things about Catholicism and God, but don't worry about that, man. Just listen, okay?
Right.
Because the Communist Party, we, right, know what's best for you when it comes to right, economics and social, economic dislocation, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a mutual enemy, which is this whole capitalist bourgeois machinery over here. And so saddle up with us, join up with us. And so that's when a lot of these communistic, Marxian-esque, atheistic talking points and viewpoints really began to fuse with a lot of religious movements. And I can, of course, go into further detail in that with that. But as far as Dr. King is concerned, again, he had these left-wing, more liberal, those are his words, liberal theological views even before he became the Dr. King that he became.
Yeah.
And so because he didn't, of course, accept the bodily resurrection of Christ. He denied the divinity of Christ, and he always, of course, placed an overemphasis on his own intellect.
And
I
the
don't know
government.
if you, I don't know if you know who. So we know when we place an emphasis on your own intellect, it kind of buys into one of the right, one of the main quotes that Marx is known for, which is, of course, the opiate of the masses and religion being the sigh of the oppressed. And so, Vladimir Lenin, I think about him. I mean, he once referred to religion as a sort of venereal disease. He had these words, the way he would describe it, right? Because, of course, in his mind, right, religion is pretty much something that weak, feeble-minded people create, of course, as as a sort of convention, so that they can simply go about the business of life without having to deal with the things that cause them pain and bring them suffering, and so on and so forth. But you as an individual, if you believe that you have the magic key, whatever that thing may be, in order to fix that, but then you have to move religion out of the way so we can actually focus on the problem, because I know how to in fact deal with the problem. So King, of course, he graduated from Morehouse when he was 19 years old. So he's always been smart, and he always had a bit of an ego about himself, and he always believed that he had the answer, more so than what what was in the Bible, I suppose. And if we also talk a bit like about education, one of them, she was probably the most influential member of the Communist Party in her heyday. And that is and she would later go on to leave the Communist. Well, she was kicked out of the Communist Party, and she dedicated the latter portion, or the last 10 or so years of her life, trying to fight communism and warn people about it. And that is, of course, the great Bella Dodd. And
Who?
Bella Dodd, her name is spelled Belladodd. Very interesting life, extremely interesting woman, brave, courageous woman. She did work on behalf of the Communist Party for over 20 years until she was eventually excommunicated. But she said, one of the things that she said, if probably you can go, and a good suggested reading would be to read her autobiography, her memoir, School of Darkness, where she said that what drove her to communism in the beginning was she really had a, she had an ego about herself when it came to her own intellect. And so
Mm,
when you notice a lot of these men and women on the left, they all seem to have that in common, is that they
yeah.
think they're smarter than, not only do they think they're smarter than the average person, right? They think they're
Mhm.
smarter than the creator of the universe, as a matter of fact.
Right.
As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, right? Only stupid people would believe that there is a
Right.
creator because stupid people, in fact, created him.
Right.
It's only
It's
smart
so
people who
funny
know better.
because like a lot of atheists, they have that same idea. Whether not all of them believe in communism, but a lot of the atheists that
Mhm.
a lot of atheists, they take on this idea that they go into these institutions. And
Mhm.
it's not even just atheists, but a lot of these left-leaning people, they go into these institutions and they come out with these harebrained ideas like men can be women and women can be men. And I'm just like, yo,
Mhm.
if you went into this university and you come out thinking that a boy can be a girl or a girl can be a boy, like you need a refund, because how do you remove such basic biology? Like they're supposed to be so enlightened,
Mhm.
they're supposed to have all these answers, and they're supposed to be the ones that are going to tell all the rest of us what we have known since time immemorial, that
Right.
in God created male and female, and that's it. That they come out and they literally know they cannot even stand on basic foundational truths. And that is, I don't really understand how that can like flip. Like how do you let somebody convince you of that? That's like, it's just bizarre.
I don't know. Have you been to college?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I would say a quick story with me. Intro was like sociology 101, and I remember and looking back on it, this professor. She was a white lady.
Mhm.
I'm assuming she was a lesbian. I'm assuming, because looking back
Mhm.
on it, yeah, I'm like, yeah, I think
Yeah.
I don't think a man would be into that
Uh-huh.
whole thing you got going on there, right? I
Right.
mean, they have a certain look about them, okay, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that I remember learning in that class was, of course, one one of the things that leftism hinges on, right, is the notion of social constructivism, right? Everything is
Mhm.
socially constructed, right? Nothing
Right.
is
Correct.
objective, right? And bear in mind, this is not new, to humanity, right? I mean, going all the way back to the Hellenic period, the
Mhm.
Greeks were debating this, going all the way back to the 5th century BCE.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way it is.
Mhm.
There was a group of philosophers during the Hellenic period that called themselves the Sophists, where we get the term sophistry, and they kind of had this relativistic, pragmatic approach to reality and
Yeah.
truth. And then, of course, they would go back and forth with the likes of Plato and Aristotle and what have you.
Mhm.
But so this whole like, just ultra relativism is nothing new. But
Yeah.
going
Right.
back to my story, so I remember her telling the class that boys learn how to be boys because of the social cultural reinforcement by way of the toys that they're introduced to, and
Wow.
vice versa, right? Same could be said for girls. They learn how to be nurturing and homemakers. They playing with Barbie dolls, baby dolls, what have you. Men learn to be aggressive. They get GI Joe and He-Man, Transformers, right? Stuff that I grew up on in the '80s as a kid, watching Hulk Hogan. So that's how it all starts. So you're put into these categories based upon, you know. And so bear in mind, I'm 18 years old, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not thinking that life in and of itself is a gift. And so you don't have a choice when you inherit the gift, because you were chosen for a reason, and you have a purpose, and you have a moral obligation to walk in that purpose because you were chosen for something, right?
Right.
But instead, you're thinking something else, right? You're thinking that you, as a sentient, autonomous being, should have the right to choose to be and act however you want to act. Okay. And
Wow.
so if you're being told as an 18-year-old that you were given toys to make you conform to something, you by almost, I don't want to say by nature, but I guess for want of better terms, you by nature want to rebel against that, because how dare you try to make me something without my consent? You
Yeah.
didn't tell me that. So my this me now. I tell anybody, right? I'm a
Yeah.
man's man, right?
Right.
But at 18 years old, I'm saying to myself, dang, when I was 5 or 6 years old, you mean to tell me maybe I wanted to play with Barbie, my parents just wouldn't let me?
Mhm.
So you start to
Just that
question
little seed of doubt.
that little
Just
seed of that,
little
and that's
seed.
how the
Yeah.
room, and that's how it creeps in.
Yeah.
So you may now, thank God I didn't go that far, but I started to
Mm.
think that maybe, this whole thing was just a whole facade, right? So some people have said to themselves, well, I'm going to rebel against what is merely social convention
Mhm.
because I don't want you telling me what to do. So
Yeah.
perhaps the manliest thing that I can do, the most masculine thing that I can do, is to wear makeup or put a dress on and do this and do that, because you aren't
Wow.
going to tell me what to do, because you've convinced, or you're trying to convince these young impressionable minds that they're being victimized by something.
Yeah.
And it's a very intoxicating message, because you aren't,
That's interesting.
again.
I totally get that, because it's basically saying, like, if someone is telling you that the ultimate way, I'm trying to think of a good example, because I've heard people say, like, basically being vulnerable is a sign of strength, something like that. So if
Mhm,
you can say, like, well, being to be masculine, if you could wear your feminism,
mhm,
that is truly, being masculine, because that it like breaks down that wall of you being who, quote unquote, who you really are, which is
mhm.
nonsense on itself, because how are you going to tell people to be who they really are by being somebody else?
Right.
It's just like, it doesn't, like, none of it makes sense.
Like, yeah, that's what they taught me, when I went to college, had me thinking that my parents and others, pulled a fast one over on me, you know. So it started making, I didn't, the way you mean to tell me that the things that I'm interested in today, or the things that I did when I was a kid, you mean to tell me that that was some way of controlling me?
Mhm.
Come on, man. It's 18, 19-year-old
Oh yeah.
kids. I mean, so they want to, you know, they
Yeah,
want
they're
to.
trying to you're trying to figure it out. I remember, so I went to I've always been like a question ask girl. I've always been very very curious child. And when my first year in college, somebody asked me, like, why are you a Christian? And I didn't have I didn't have it. I could not provide a defense for my faith.
Hmm.
And it really made me start to question, like, well, why am I a Christian? And I was like, well, I don't want to be walking around here believing in something that I don't really know why I believe it. And I went
Hmm.
down this whole path of, like, I started studying all these, I studied Buddhism and a little bit of Islam, and I looked into the 5%ers, and I mean, I was just like all over the place. And ultimately, just to keep the story short, I came back to Christ. But yeah, like, when you don't, that's what the Bible says: train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he gets older he will not depart from it. Because the world is going to come at you with all these different ideas of nonsense,
Yep.
And and the Bible also says, I will it's I will take the foolish things to confound the wise. All these wise men that think they're so wise, but it's like, but you don't know that men are men and girls are girls, and
Foolishness.
yeah, it's foolishness. And these so-called smart people have they come in, you come into this space with kids, and you literally are shaping their minds. And if you have not raised up your children to be firm, especially believers, and hold steadfast to those things, when the world starts to come at them, they're not gonna know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you made a good point that professing Christians, they need to because see, faith is not a because I used to be one of those people again who was high on my my own intellect, right?
Mhm.
It was one of those things where, simply put, you thought, they, as they say, the God of the gaps, right? You just thought that
Mm,
people who run around talking about Christianity and God, etc., are just people who haven't figured it out yet, or haven't
yeah,
found the answers, and so they've given up, or whatever the case was. And so
yeah.
I looked at it like that, like, pretty
Yeah.
much religion is something that only dumb people believed in.
Hmm.
The religion is not for the wise. But
Right.
I was completely, I mean, I had it backwards.
Yeah.
Faith is for the wise, because faith, and this is what I think a lot of Christians, I don't want to get too into that, unless you're sure, I'll let you take it where you
Oh,
want to take it.
go ahead.
But I don't think that Christians do a good enough job in, at the very least, informing people, particularly the young and their own children, that faith is not a matter of emotion. Faith speaks to the intellect as well,
Hmm.
because faith in God through Christ, more
Hmm.
specifically,
Hmm.
is the only thing that intellectually makes sense. It's not just a matter of what you feel. People talk about faith, blind faith, and this and this and that. It's just like, oh, yeah, people who scoff at the religious say, "Oh, you throw around the word faith because, well, again, I'd rather know than believe." It's like, no, 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 no. I believe because I know.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
matter of feeling. It's
Yeah.
also
And
the
atheists
process of the intellect.
believe, atheists have a faith too.
Absolutely.
And there's a Christian apologist that I listened to. His name is Frank Turek, and he wrote a book, said, "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist."
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard
because
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a belief too. And I love what
Mhm.
you said, because I would consider myself, I guess, I really don't like to say it any I don't like to say it this way anymore, but I would consider myself, I guess, what would generally be said as an intellectual, because I'm a
Mhm.
kind of a nerd on a lot of things. But when I really started to understand God and Christianity, it is the only one that actually makes sense.
Yep.
It's the only one that literally tells you from the gate, hey, you're screwed up. All these other religions are like, well, you're so great and wonderful, and everything that you do is right and good. No, the Bible is straight up and down. No, you're messed up and you need a savior. Like, it's
Yeah.
the only one that is like honest about it. Christianity is the only religion that paints an accurate picture of humanity and the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what frustrates, I was having a conversation with someone you may be familiar with, Layla Gray.
Hmm.
Our Instagram handle and YouTube channel is Propaganda Fluent.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with her about a year or so ago on her YouTube channel, and we spoke. And I said during that talk with her, I said that atheists and the like, they know that, they understand that. They just don't accept it because they they just don't. The truth, the weight of it is what upsets them.
Mm.
Right. And again, humility is the first step toward virtue, and they refuse to accept that because they
Yeah.
don't want to see themselves in that way.
Yeah. There's
And
boundaries with
yeah,
Christianity.
they
There
know it's
are
true. Yeah,
rules. There's
again.
conditions.
Hmm.
There are, there's a standard. It
Hmm.
isn't a religion, and that is good because we don't have to look at anybody else's life. We can look at our own lives
Hmm.
and our own history and know, yeah, if somebody didn't rein me in, or if someone didn't, speak into my life, or if something didn't happen, I would be, dead, and and so many different things, because we are reckless. We're reckless.
Hmm.
And you have to be honest to admit that, like,
Hmm. Yeah,
it's just the
yeah.
truth.
And I mean that's where we are today, man. With this genderless society, because going back to this whole issue of the left and communism and everything else, uh, and in my most recent YouTube upload, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, where I detailed, I give a lot of the backstory and a lot of history of the LGBTQ
Yes.
movement or whatever, and
Hmm.
and just the sexual revolution and homosexuality and everything else. And the founder of the gay liberation movement, Harry Hay,
Yeah.
said that Harry Hay, yeah, he key figure, and he was the first to openly consider uh, homosexuals as an oppressed minority.
Hmm.
The homosexual as an oppressed minority.
Yeah.
And there was a work, I can't remember the title of it, but it was published in 1951. Finally, where he detailed this, because the whole designation of an oppressed minority was something that was relegated or set aside for racial groups,
Right.
and he brought homosexuals into that fold. But
Hmm.
Harry Hay was a longtime member of the Communist Party, so you square that. Okay, so the founder of gay liberation was
Hmm.
also a member of the Communist Party, and in his own words, he took to communism and he joined the Communist Party because, and I quote, he believed that communism would support homosexuality under its principles. And to that, Harry Hay was correct, because Vladimir Lenin said himself that when it comes to morality, there is or shouldn't be a morality that proceeds the supernatural, because the supernatural, Vladimir Lenin claimed, again, was something that feeble minded men erected in order to protect the interests of the bourgeois state.
Hmm.
So, in order to be a communist, you reject all aspects of objectivity, truth, and that, once again, that speaks to morality,
Right.
because when it comes to uh, right, sexual dimorphism, male, female,
Hmm.
how a man ought to be in the world, how a woman ought to be in the world, what is her
Hmm.
role, what are their roles in relation to one another, the role of the
Yeah.
family, and everything else. See, there is nothing objectively true about that. That is
Hmm.
just a hallmark pillar that is propped up by the bourgeois state. And what we as participants in the, whatever sort of social, economic, or political context wherein we find ourselves, uh, what we consider to be knowledge is downstream from power relationships. So
Yeah.
what we think is true, we only believe it because someone powerful said, well, this is how it ought to be. So
Right.
everything is to be, to quote Marx and Engels, is to be ruthlessly criticized. And so this is why Hay became a communist. He said, well, if
Hence
sexuality,
critical race theory,
right,
hence
if,
critical theory, and
yeah,
all of the critical
because if
whatever.
if sexuality is a moral issue,
Hmm.
and communists are saying that there is no objective morality, then who is to say that heterosexuality is objectively morally superior than homosexuality?
That's it.
You can't make the case.
Yeah.
And so that's why Harry Hay
Yeah.
joined the Communist Party. And again, he's the one who introduced the
Wow.
concept. He introduced the idea. And again, because class distinction. The whole purpose is to create a classless society, and that's the point I wanted to make ultimately, is that the whole evisceration of the gender paradigm, the polemic there is, again, to promote this classless society,
Mm.
to remove the woman from the home and put her somewhere else in a society where she can dedicate her life and time to more productive work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Marx too was, I forget his exact quote, but he hated, like, the traditional family.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, he and it's funny because, he was married. He did have children, but again, he was a horrible provider, a horrible father, a horrible
mm,
husband. I mean, he and his
yeah.
wife stayed together. God bless them. She died before he did. He did not attend her funeral. As a matter of fact, I think because he was so bedridden, he was so ill. The man he barely moved around. He barely bathed. He
I
was just
heard that. Yeah.
he was a very just awful, disgusting man. And of course,
Yeah.
he raised his children up to be communists as well. His children were atheists and communists, and so were their husbands, his daughters. But yeah, Marx, in one of his letters to Engels, said that blessed is the man who has no family,
Mm-hmm.
because the burden of being a husband and being a father was so. I mean, it was kind of one of those things where he and Engels were going back and forth, just guys being guys,
Yeah.
sitting around talking about, oh man, the old ball and chain, my
Right.
wife,
Right.
she getting on my nerves, she pestering me. And
Right.
Marx just said, man, blessed is the man that has no family. I'm sick and tired of dealing with her and
Right.
all of that mess and whatnot. But yes, all but on a more serious note, when Marx was being serious and perhaps not speaking in just to his collaborator Engels, he said quite frankly that all social relationships are to be uprooted.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, and it begins especially with the family, for sure,
That's right. Yeah.
because marriage, it's all encompassing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I heard
It's
Pastor
the
Vodi Bakum
bedrock
say this
of
once.
any society,
Yeah, I,
family.
I heard Pastor Vodi Bakum say this once, that, well, what a lot of people do is they take things and they compartmentalize them, right? When it comes
Mm-hmm.
to man and woman as a value, as a thing, and then there's
Uh-huh.
husband and wife, and then there's family, and then there's sexuality and all those things. And
Mm-hmm.
Vodi said, you have to understand that from beginning to end, it's all encompassing, because
Mm-hmm.
all of those things are. So when you hear people on the left, when they try to differentiate between what they call sex and gender, well,
Mm-hmm.
sex is one thing, gender is something else.
Right.
No, sex and gender are not two separate things,
Mm-hmm.
because, right, form denotes function. Your body indicates, and this is one of the things going all the way back to pagan Greece that meant, like Aristotle talked about, is that the knowledge that is gained through the senses is supposed to give you an insight into what lie beyond the veil. And
Mm.
so your senses may speak to your intellect, but your intellect is what's meant to ignite the soul, and the
Right.
soul is what carries you into what we would consider the God realm, or the
Yeah.
realm of the gods. And so I, as a man, you as a woman, part of your form is meant to tell you exactly what you are meant to do
Mm-hmm.
with what God has given you, because the body is, of course, just as important as the soul, or just as important as the spirit, because mind and or body and spirit are in fact one. So your body
Mm-hmm.
tells you what you are to do with it. You
Yeah,
can't separate the two.
it's written down to all the way into your DNA.
All the way down to your DNA.
Yeah,
Man.
God
Hmm.
literally writes it
Hmm.
into how how women's brains work, what our bodies look like, what our bodies can do,
Hmm.
and and what how men's brains work and what their bodies can do. Like it is literally his
Not,
mark on
yep,
you,
it's not trivial.
of
Yeah, it's
of
not
of,
trivial.
of
Sex is not superficial.
that's right. That's
Male
right.
female is not superficial, but
Yeah.
to the left, it is. It's just, you just take life, you take people, places, and things, and you move them around until you can get to this perfect scenario where
Yeah.
uh you know they're there are no more class distinctions, and therefore
Mhm.
there's no exploitation and no suffering and
Right.
everything else. But you and I know that's not possible.
Right.
Unfortunately, I want to say they haven't figured that out yet, but there is no they, because it is it's a spirit of confusion that will be with us until the end of time.
That's
This
true.
is why, you had the French Revolution, and then you had the Bolshevik Revolution, and now, the West is on the brink of complete and utter collapse.
Yeah.
Despite all of despite the historical record and all the
Right.
references that we have, it's just like, right, wash, rinse, repeat, and then you have a whole new cycle of people coming to the world, and then they think like Eve that they can be like God, and it's not
That's what
possible.
that was the goal. That was the goal. So with talking about LGBTQ in particular, this queer theory that believes that there is no that these are social sex is a social construct and
Mhm.
behaviors, or all those things. That what was his name? Harry? Is it Harry
Harry
Hay?
Hay.
Yes. So he attached himself to the civil rights movement, didn't
Hmm.
he? How
Hmm.
did he like let everybody know how he did that?
Well, it was sort of like, and let me see, because I love the way the Virgil Hunter piece you sent me. I love the
Oh,
way he
Virgil
put it.
Walker.
Virgil, what did I say? Hunter? Who the heck is Virgil Hunter? Is that Where did I come up with Hunter from? I'm thinking Virgil Hunter is somebody, I don't know, but yeah, Virgil Walker. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's just like, well, you got to make you go out and you make the case, right, and then you use the same talking points, the same modality, the same methodology that the civil rights movement used. You just attached yourself to it, and that's
Hmm.
how you create, again, the popular front tactic, so that you can expand the proletariat. You have to expand the proletariat. And so, yeah, he inculcated himself. He attached himself. See, what Harry Hay in particular, okay, it was sort of difficult for him to really be out front, in terms of just becoming a full, just out marching and being. I'm not saying that he didn't participate
Hmm.
in a lot of the things that were going on in the 50s and the 60s with respect to the civil rights movement. But by that particular time, Harry Hay was a bit of a social pariah, because it became known to everyone that he was, in fact, a member of the Communist Party. Uh,
Mm.
he left. He would leave the Communist Party because the Communist Party had this open hostility and ban towards homosexuals, because they believed that being openly gay, or being gay, just in general, I suppose, would make one susceptible to blackmail.
Oh
Because
yes, yes.
let me say this too as an aside. I'm sorry, though. Pardon me if you see me looking back and forth, because I
Oh
like
no,
to take
no, no.
notes
You're
and
good.
stuff
You're
like that
good.
while we're speaking. I just want to jot this down so I won't lose my point. But let me just explain this while I'm thinking about it. For people who don't understand, when it comes to the Communist Party in the United States, um, was receiving their dictates from Moscow. See, when you hear people, when they talk about Joe McCarthy and the Red Scare and the red under every bed and all this stuff,
Hmm.
first thing, that wasn't a Joe McCarthy thing. That was a bipartisan thing, because you had Republicans, and you had anti-communist Republicans, and you had anti-communist Democrats. Some
Uh-huh.
of the most hawkish anti-communists in American history were Democrats. That's just a fact. It's just true.
And I
Just,
think some of them were probably a part of the KKK, just to say.
yeah,
Like I think
yeah,
some they
and
were like
yeah.
some
There probably
staunch
were some, yeah, and there were
anti-communist.
probably some anti-communists in the KKK. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
one of the most, this was the president that introduced the very concept of the intellectual president into the American consciousness, and that was none other than Ivy League educated Woodrow Wilson.
There you go. Yep.
Woodrow
Mhm.
Wilson went so far as to provide arms to the, I believe he provided arms to the Mensheviks during the days of the Russian Civil War. Woodrow Wilson was trying to oust Lenin and his cadre from power in
Mhm.
the newly formed Soviet Russia, because
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson, in spite of what a lot of us history doesn't tell the story, and I get it. This is why I brought up Woodrow Wilson, because you brought up the Klan.
Yeah.
Everyone knows about Woodrow Wilson's staunch pro-segregationist views, and most folks would just outright say that he was a flat-out racist.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at the greatest anti-communist presidents in American history, we of course look to Ronald Reagan. But if you wanted to be honest, if you knew the history, that one of the most staunchest, hawkish, anti-communist presidents in American history was in fact Woodrow Wilson.
Mm.
And if you look at some of the early communist literature, they were the harshest in that particular period in time, from about the 1910s to about the 1960s, all the way up to. The Communist Party in America was vicious toward the Democrat Party. I mean, vicious.
Mm.
So it's funny when you look at Democrats today, try to make it seem as though, well, it was the Republicans that were so anti-freedom and this, that, and the third,
Yeah.
when in fact that the Communist Party could not stand the Democrat Party, because they viewed the Democrat Party as, of course, the imperialist and the fascist and this and that, because, of course, the whole Vietnam thing began under JFK, and then with the Gulf of Tonkin and LBJ. But even prior to that, we had the Korean War, and that was under the auspice of Harry Truman, who was another Democrat who the communists at the time were accusing of trying to instigate World War III by involving the United States in the efforts to prevent South Korea from becoming communist. Okay, so going back to what I was saying, that it wasn't so much that our politicians were against free speech, or were against you being a part of a political party, or were against this. No, that was not the case. Completely not the history. The reason why the United States government, led by Joe McCarthy, if you want to call it that, even though it wasn't just him. If you want to be honest about it, the reason why our government was, so focused on that is because the Communist Party in the United States was an organ, was an extension of the Kremlin. When you joined the Communist Party of America, you took an oath. And when I say you took it, I mean that quite literally. Have you ever seen the great film by Martin Scorsese, Goodfellas? You ever seen
Yes, yes,
Goodfellas, the movie?
yes.
Okay, so remember what Goodfellas was about. So Goodfellas, remember that they were affiliated with the Lucchese crime family, but the guy Paul Vario, Paulie, he was the boss above everybody else in the neighborhood, but he was a capo in the Lucchese family, and all the people that were associated with Paulie were just associates, but they weren't actual soldiers or members of the La Cosa Nostra, because you have in La Cosa Nostra, you have a capo who runs his crew of soldiers, and he reports upward to the underboss, etc., etc. But you have people who either want to become members of the mafia, or they do the bidding of the mafia, but they aren't actual members for a multitude of reasons. Perhaps they aren't Italian or whatever, or maybe they just don't want to become members. Okay, that's how the Communist Party operated. Those who were not card-carrying members, they called them fellow travelers, and because they endorsed their beliefs, and perhaps one of the key things that one who was sympathetic to the cause of the Communist Party would have to do in order to prove their bona fides is they would have to take a trip to Moscow. They would have to go to the Soviet Union. And these are the folks that they call fellow travelers. John Dewey took a trip to Moscow. Margaret Sanger took a trip to Moscow. And I can go on and on and on, right?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. He honeymooned in Moscow, right?
Right.
And so, but you had those who were actual members of the Communist Party, and those were the ones that they referred to as card-carrying communists, because you actually had a registration card. And when you became a member of the Communist Party, you took an oath. You literally took an oath, and I wish I knew what that oath was off the top of my head. I could quote it for you, but you pledged allegiance to Lenin in the Kremlin. And so the issue was that if you were a member of the Communist Party in the United States, it was clearly stipulated to you that if war were to ever break out between America and the Soviet Union, you had to take up arms against the United States. See, people don't understand that the Communist Party was not just a political party. Now, you look at the Democrat Party today, we're talking about something different. And I'm not saying that politicians are corrupt. Politics it's a corrupt business. I get
Right.
that. Set that aside for a second and focus solely on this if you can. And I'm talking to the viewing audience.
Yeah.
The Communist Party was an international conspiracy. It was a top-down conspiracy, and every communist element in the world received its marching orders from the Kremlin, which was the communist headquarters of the world, because the communist movement was international. This is why Vladimir Lenin set up, and I think it was 1921, he set up what was called the Soviet Comintern. And the go-between between the Communist Party of America and the Soviet Communist wing was a man by the name of shoot, I'm forgetting his freaking name. Anyway, it'll come to me. But my point is that you had to answer to Moscow. So these people who were communists in America, they weren't loyal to the country. And that's why our government was so hell-bent on figuring out, were you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Because you were literally spying on America for the Soviets.
So do you think that that's why this whole Russia-Ukraine thing is so there? It's like, oh, Russia, because I don't know what's going on, but something in their buttermilk is not clean to me. Like I don't know, but this whole Ukraine thing is just something is just off about it to me. But do you think that that's why even people who would sort of be more on the side of like not going to war are like, no, we gotta, but it's Russia. We gotta handle this. Do you think that that's maybe why some of those?
Well, you see, that's what a lot of folks are pushing, right? The Russia's an enemy, and Vladimir Putin, ex-KGB, and so on and so forth. And that's one of the things. And when it comes to that particular conflict, I haven't really gone out publicly and really touched on that a lot, because I'm still trying to work my way through. I'm still trying to figure some things out.
Yeah,
because
it's something don't smell right though.
Yeah, something don't smell quite right. I'm still trying to work things out. I look at what Russia's doing. I look at what Vladimir Putin is doing, some of the public statements that he's been making, and I mean, I'm still trying to work that conflict out. I haven't really came down on either side. I'm just still kind of sitting back watching all the players move and figuring out exactly how I feel about it. So I'm going to reserve comment until I figure it out.
I respect that.
Yeah,
but
you were saying something about Harry Hay and the civil rights movement. That's what you were getting at. But I just really wanted to like hammer that point home, because when it came to the Communist Party, it was not politics as usual. This was a criminal conspiracy. Again, and the people who joined the Communist Party of America were not loyal to the United States. They wanted the Soviet Union to win the Cold War, and they were working on behalf of the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin from inside our own borders. And that's what the issue was. It was never an issue of your freedom to be whatever you wanted to be and think however you wanted to think. That was never true.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, America's like, go ahead and worship who you want to worship, say what you want to say, do you, but you cannot do that and be conspiring against
the
United
because
States.
the communist it was a nefarious conspiracy. It was a clandestine conspiracy. So why let you openly operate when you're trying to topple the country? And you're lying, and you're engaging in espionage, you're stealing secrets, and this and that there. I mean, this conspiracy went all the way, of course, to the highest citadels of state power, right?
Look at Biden and China now.
Look at where we are today. And it doesn't seem as though Republican or Democrat is really interested in trying to figure out how far has China infiltrated our country.
Because I think we know that it is extremely deep. When
extremely deep.
that have,
extremely deep.
in the
Mhm.
universities, well, they
Yep.
were arrested, I think last year, a couple years ago, or at least I know they were at least deported, I think, that they were giving secrets, and they were like giving, I think it was like patent secrets or something like IP,
Hmm.
intellectual property to
Yep.
China.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. They just, yep. They do it. They're doing it then. They're doing it back then with the Manhattan
yeah.
Project and everything. I mean, that's how the Soviet Union was able to develop their first nuclear bomb in 1953 because of the secrets that was smuggled out of the United States and sent over to the Soviet Union thanks to their spies.
Now,
So
do
this.
you think that America? Now I know we do our dirt.
Hmm.
We do
Hmm.
our dirt. But do you think that we have infiltrated other governments like
Hmm.
ours has been infiltrated this deep with a an ideology that is so antithetical to what this country was founded on? Do you think we've been able to export our idea that deep
Now, when you say export,
where they don't want it?
yeah, when you say export our ideas, do you mean like talking about the ideas of the framers and the founders, or you're talking about this new this pathogen, this woke, this sickness that we have going on? What do you mean?
Um,
Because a lot, I mean, these ideas, I mean, again, they're exported from the West, right? I mean, these left wing ideas, these are Western creations,
yeah.
just like the better better parts of our history and our tradition, our Western ideas as well. So, I mean, which one are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the good, like the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit
Okay,
of happiness, capitalism. And
got
like, do you think we've been able to export the founding fathers' idea to a place that doesn't want it? Because it's one thing, because I know America we've been able to export that idea to
you.
people, and it has become a blessing to them, and they want it.
Right.
But have we been able to, because we don't want communism, but they have been able to export their ideas into our country.
Hmm.
We been able to do that same thing in other countries?
Now, not in places that don't want it, right?
Yeah.
Because these are totalitarian regimes, right? And we're open. We give
Right.
folks the benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, we look. I mean,
Yeah.
despite what the left says about the character of this nation, the collective character of this nation, we're very caring, open, tolerant, good faith people. And this
Hmm.
is how communists were allowed to infiltrate.
Right. That's what
This
I.
one, it's the whole, I call it the Batman and the Joker juxtaposition or dichotomy. It's sort of like, and I say that because it's like, Batman has to figure out a way to defeat the Joker and the likes of the others in his rogues gallery without
Hmm.
becoming like them, right? So you have to find a way to sort of draw the line, right? That line between order and chaos. And so, how do
Hmm.
you have a free and fair and open society without letting ideas that are anti or antithetical to that
Hmm.
influence that society to the point where it becomes that?
Yeah.
Uh, there's no easy answer to that question.
Mm.
It just really isn't. And that's why, going back to more of it with the MLK and the civil rights movement, and we're talking about Joe McCarthy. I had a private conversation with our friend Chad O. Jackson, and I was talking on the phone with him. I said, "Man, let me tell you something." And it was funny because it was during a conversation that you, me, Chad, and Blanchard were on. And
Hmm.
that's, Chad had said something about Joe McCarthy during that conversation about how Joe McCarthy was a patriot, and he's plastered and pilloried by both the left and the right for being
Hmm.
this guy who was against civil liberties, civil liberties of Americans.
Hmm.
And that wasn't the case. And I said, Chad, you know what? And I wanted to say something during that, but it was four of us. And I was
Yeah.
like, we all talk equally. We're going to be here for 7, 8 hours. So I kind
Right.
of let it go. And plus, I
Yeah.
didn't know how the three of you were going to react to what I said. But I told Chad on the phone, like, and I wanted to throw J. Edgar Hoover's name in that mix as well,
Hmm.
because J. Edgar Hoover, the legacy and the life of J. Edgar Hoover is not told fairly. He is a villain of American history. And I'm not saying that perhaps he should be considered a villain of American history. But again, like you and I know very well, Quisha, that there are a lot of villains who aren't depicted in that way, which is why
Right.
we're having this conversation right now,
Right.
because things aren't always what they seem, nor
That's
are
right.
they. Knowing what we know about people like Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
and knowing what we know today about men like Huey P. Newton and the Black
Mm-hmm.
Panther Party as a whole and
Mm-hmm.
what have you. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. I mean, what would you do if an element like that was afoot in your nation and your responsibility was to protect this country and its citizens? What would you do? And this is one of the things that they use to to dismiss again Martin Luther King's radicalism because of Martin Luther King's connection with men like Stanley Levison and Bayard Rustin and other
Mm-hmm.
communist elements. This is one of the reasons why J. Edgar Hoover began his surveillance campaign, because J. Edgar Hoover, because you and I, this 2023,
Uh-huh.
we're asking the question:
Uh-huh.
was the civil rights movement a communist front movement? J.
Woo!
Edgar Hoover was asking that question back in the 1950s,
Hello,
1960s.
somebody.
Now, we know J. Edgar Hoover, we know about his life and we know about his sexuality and what he did.
Yep.
Now, he was in the cross dressing and he had a gay lover. He did all that
Yeah.
stuff. Fine and dandy.
And I think he was Black. Just you ever seen pictures of him when he was young?
I have it. I have it. I'm gonna look him up though. He might have a little
I'm just
melanin
saying.
magic. But
I'm just
yeah,
saying.
the question that we're asking the same question that J. Edgar Hoover was asking 60 years ago. So maybe he wasn't as bad as we all thought he was. But
Or
um,
maybe we all have complex
yeah, it's complex. That's the
stories.
point that I was trying to make, right?
Yes, and it's
No.
not history is not
Mm-hmm.
cut and dry.
Cut and
And I
dry.
was,
Yep.
I was saying to someone earlier today, in talking, was really excited about the conversation that we were going to have today. And I was like, yeah, we're going to be talking about this and this and that. And I was like, these heroes or these people that we make up in our mind. And I was like, if I was to journal my life, what I believed and thought when I was 20 is going to be different in the 30s, in my 30s, and then my 40s, and and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like to sum up America with this. We like to sum up a person with that. And it's like you can't. That is why only
Mm-hmm.
God can truly, righteously, justly judge the heart, because it's so complex.
That's right.
Just in our own being, and we're trying to say like America's a racist country, and it's like, well, wait a minute now.
Mm-hmm.
Or J. Edgar Hoover, he was just totally bad, because once I started learning just a little bit about Martin Luther King and this new revelation of who this guy really was, and some of the things that he was, that he believed, and he wrote it.
Yeah.
Like he didn't even hide it.
Right.
Um,
Yep. He didn't hide.
he
He
didn't
didn't
have to.
hide it.
He
Yeah.
didn't hide it. But
He,
you have to. You can't just. You have to be willing to have that conversation and say, oh well, this person, maybe they didn't all, maybe they didn't believe, maybe they weren't the hero that I thought they were, or they were maybe they weren't the hero that you thought that they were, and you have to
yep.
be okay with that. Are you going to not walk in truth about who somebody is and who you thought they were, just to keep the idea of the person? Like, that doesn't make any sense to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Why would you want to believe that somebody was something else just to keep the idea? And that brings me to this question, which is kind of like where I struggled. So when MLK Day came around this year, I was like, whew, all right.
Mm-hmm.
So all I just put, because that disgusting, weird sculpture had been revealed, and I was like, well, this is the only. And I posted a picture of me at the monument of the MLK monument, which is actually, it was very well done. I was like really impressed. I was like, wow, this is really good. And so I posted a picture of me standing in front of it because it's very the details is it's very good. And I said, this is the only monument of Martin Luther King that I'll respect. Now, I was very even conflicted in that because I was like, I am like, the Civil Rights Act was necessary. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was necessary, I think, because there were still some rights that were not being afforded to Black Americans. Now, also, it went too far. It ended up going too far. In my opinion, it went too far. It included some things it should never have included. I don't know. As I'm saying this, I'm like, well, actually,
You're working out real
I'm thinking
time,
about
huh?
the Constitution
Yeah.
of what was this?
It,
Were we
it
signing something into law? Was this like redundant?
yeah,
Was this a
it was
redundant?
certainly constitutional. It was federal overreach.
Yeah,
Again, and they were able to get away with it again because they abandoned incrementalism because the races were coming together. The races were coming together
that's right.
beforehand, before
That's
all
right.
of this took place. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why we asked the question: well, what was this really a communist front movement? And because one of the tactics that communists use is that, of course, you have to exacerbate conflict. When there is no conflict, you have
Right.
to create conflict.
That's right.
And so communists always over and they did this time and time again. There was a case from back was it the 20s or 30s involving I think it was in Alabama, this case of the Scottsboro boys. If you aren't familiar with that case, it's a case when 9 black boys were convicted of raping 2 white women, I think, on a train.
Mm.
And I think they were tried and sentenced to death in just one day. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, you guys can correct me in the comment section when you post this. I think the Supreme Court swiftly overturned that verdict because they realized how unjust it was. But just going all the way back to then, and then fast forwarding to the 1960s, it's communists always have taken the whole racial thing and sort of used it to create all of this fuss and all this noise,
Yeah.
when in fact the races were coming together. And what you had happen was, there began to be this rancor and acrimony between the races
Mm-hmm.
once blacks began to abandon that true sense of decency that they had cultivated
Right.
during their time in slavery, through Reconstruction, on
Mm-hmm.
up and through the early 20th century. And they
Yeah.
began to, of course, abandon that sense of virtue that was bestowed upon them by their foremothers and forefathers. And then you had people who are outside the black community saying to themselves, well, look at this, and look at the way they're acting, look at the way that they're behaving.
Yeah.
Because a lot of blacks, particularly a lot of young blacks, were saying the hell with decency and the hell with going along and getting along, and saying that, sort of
Right.
like the whole Booker T. Washington attitude, that
Mm-hmm.
if you present yourself as someone of value, or if you are actually someone of value, then the collective, the multiracial collective, will accept you regardless of your race. But you have to
Mm-hmm.
prove yourself to
Right.
be one of value, because what actually breeds that sort of true love and compassion toward one another is cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And cooperation in moving towards a mutually desired outcome, whether it be like what we saw, and I think is a very underrated film, and I love, and you don't see this from Hollywood often, and it was a Disney film at that. When you look at the film Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington,
Mm-hmm.
based upon a true story.
Yeah.
And there is no left wing slant, there's no right wing. There's a scene in that film. Have you seen Remember the Titans?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the scene in that. Anyway, I won't get off into that, right? Because there was a scene in that film that I just love. But the point is that blacks and whites, if there is a mutually desired goal and someone outside your race has something that you think would benefit you, it's sort of like our framers and our founders in the intellectual and philosophical traditions that they inherited from the likes of, Edmund Burke and Adam Smith and John Locke
Mhm.
and Thomas Paine, etc. It's like you have to create a system where man's vices will work in his favor. So everyone knows that human beings are innately selfish to some degree.
Right.
Some of us more so than others,
Hmm.
right? But like the great Ayn Rand, she talked about how, this whole notion of altruism and compassion is what destroys a society.
Hmm.
Altruism and compassion is what brought about communism in the Soviet Union. And
Yep.
so use man's selfishness to flip the script in a way that's going to benefit him. And
Yep.
so I, as an individual, I don't produce goods and services, right? I don't bring goods and services to bear in the market because I just intrinsically want to do something nice for a stranger. No, I
Right.
want to feed myself and I want to feed my family.
That's right.
If you are someone of value, then you have to have faith in the fact that the individual will overcome his own prejudice
Yeah.
because the reward outweighs the risk of him ignoring you on the basis of your skin color if you have something to offer that man. We talked about Walter Williams, right? We talked about prejudice and racism goes. Walter Williams once famously said that, yeah, you ain't gonna find no racist in a foxhole. This is why the military as an institution was one of the biggest key institutions in American life that helped break down a lot of racial barriers. Because when
Yeah.
our back against the wall, we black, we white, we got the same uniform on, we fighting the enemy. I ain't
Okay.
got time to be prejudiced. Ain't no colored only foxholes.
Exactly.
Everybody,
Exactly.
come on, get in.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why capitalism works.
That's why it
That's why it
works.
works.
Capitalism is right. It's just. Capitalism is moral. It's
Hmm.
the best system that we have,
That's it.
given the nature of man, right? And so to go back to the civil rights, when you start, you have to, and those things have to take place over time because the
Hmm.
heart, again, has to change over time. When you
Yeah.
start getting a third party, and in this case, the third party being the state, involved in private interactions, all
Hmm.
you do is disincentivize cooperation, and that
Right.
just breeds contempt among
Man.
the races. So, and two, just going all the way back, that's why I jotted it down when we talked about Harry Hay, just to
Yeah.
end that point that, by that time, and I know I'm going all the way back, y'all, but me and Keisha had kind of got on a stream right at that time.
Yeah.
But Harry Hay wasn't really out front in terms of the civil rights movement again because communism. It was known he was a known communist, and it was just so tainted at the time
Hmm.
that members of the civil rights movement and even members of the NAACP like John Wilkins and his the likes of men like John Wilkins, they didn't want anything to do with people who were open communists because they knew that the majority of Americans were in fact anti-communist. And so
Hmm.
Harry Hay didn't really have a key role as far as my knowledge in the actual civil rights movement because
Right.
he was pretty much political poison at that point, and because of his radical views about sexuality, a
Hmm.
lot of the gay pro-homosexual groups that he in fact founded began to disown him as well. He founded a society, a quasi secret society of homosexuals who were engaged. I guess this was for the political and social improvement empowerment of homosexuals, called the Mattachine Society. And he was excommunicated, from the Mattachine Society because of his membership to the Communist Party and also for his embrace of pedophilia. And from
Mm.
there, Harry Hay went on to help start a group known as the Radical Fairies. And I'll let you all dig into the history of the Radical Fairies. They're a group that's still around, by the way. And Harry
Mm.
Hay, like I said again, he was a big supporter of the North American Man Boy Love Association.
That's right. I was watching your
Mhm.
commentary on this. That's
Yeah.
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 And
So
but
you know,
but there
yeah, you
was
can imagine.
they
Go ahead.
did come together at some point. The LGBTQ and the civil rights. Like there was
Mhm.
you were talking about that where they did
Mhm.
come together at some point and they began to
Yeah.
like
Well,
work in unison towards the
well, well,
common goal,
well,
basically.
yeah, because you know you had all type of upheavals. Again, this is what the civil rights movement helped to usher in. They helped to usher in this culture of activism and protest. And this is why the left, they love Dr. King. They love to, and then again, our friend Chad O. Jackson says, "Let go of the rope over the tug of war.
Yeah,
Let go of the rope in the tug of war over Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy."
yeah.
Because people on the right like to say, "Well, Dr. King was more like one of us," and then the
Hmm.
left says, "No, you know, he was actually one of us." But
Yeah,
I think to Chad's point, I don't even know if he would put it like this, but I think the left won that argument. What conservatives have to do is have the courage of their convictions to then go out and make the point as to why they're willing to let Dr. Martin Luther King go. Because
yeah.
if we are truly Christians and truly conservatives and Christian
Hmm.
especially then we have to really, really get dogged and begin to cling to our principles and to our values. But
Yeah,
to your point about the merger of the civil rights movement and the LGBT, yeah, by that time, gay liberation and feminism, that whole thing was pretty much in full swing. And
hmm,
I remember in that video that you're talking about that I did, I was reading from Time Magazine's 1970 article praising the author of Sexual Politics, a woman by the name of Kate Millett, who wrote
yeah.
the book Sexual Politics that was published in 1970. Time Magazine referred to Kate Millett's, or I'm sorry, Time Magazine referred to Kate Millett as the Mao Zedong of women's liberation.
That's
And
right.
it was the New York Times that heralded Kate Millett's book, Sexual Politics, as the Bible of feminism, the Bible of sexual politics. Uh, and so, again, the whole point and the whole purpose of feminism and homosexuality, it is to again undermine and to undercut the sanctity of the union of male and female.
Yeah.
And so, and when
And
I
the,
was reading
the
from that,
family. Yeah.
yep, in that article, in that 1970 Times Magazine article, it said that during the time that Kate Millett began to rise and she became prominent, was, of course, was on the heels of the civil rights movement. And to quote their article, that the civil rights movement created more feminists.
Hmm.
The civil rights movement created more feminists.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so again, they began to come in and it's like, well, shoot, well, we can jump on this bandwagon too, because if you're
Hmm.
oppressed, then we're oppressed.
Yep.
And they said, well, shoot, well, come on in. And then uh, once again, all of these liberals and progressives, and mind you, this is what men like Joe Stalin and Vladimir Lenin, they use these terms, liberals, progressives, get the liberals and the progressives on our side.
Mm.
Because what they don't realize is they think that they are doing themselves a favor by circling the wagons around us and giving us protection, essentially, because we are then allowed to operate, because they give us credence and legitimacy,
Yeah.
because they make it seem as though what we stand for is simply freedom or
Right.
civil rights or civil liberties,
Right.
right? The ACLUs and
Man.
so on and so forth. When in fact, the ACLU, another communist front organization, was started by communists. One of the
Mm.
one of the charter members of the ACLU was a Methodist preacher by the name of Harry Ward, who was a member of the
The
Communist
Methodist
Party.
Church, I don't even know like what they're doing anymore. Like
Mhm.
they have long
Yeah,
lost any credibility. I don't know what
yeah.
the heck they doing over there,
Mhm.
but it is
But
not the gospel. That's all I
mhm,
know. I
yeah,
don't know what they're doing, but
but but
it ain't
yeah,
the
but
gospel.
yeah, the ACLU again, another communist front organization, and so
Wow.
you get, you again infiltrate the civil rights movement, and you know, Dr. King was becoming more radical in the last couple of years of his life, and yeah, the gay right even by then, this was after the death of Dr. King. Even some of the forces that when you listen to conventional history, they say, well, you had the right. They break it up, right? They dichotomize it. They say, well, you had king here, you had the king element that was like passive resistance, right? You could pretty much call them the more Fabian leftists. Is what I call them, the more Fabian leftists.
Okay.
And you had the more Bolshevik leftists that were in the Malcolm X camp, right? But say that the Malcolm X camp, they weren't really into the whole LGBT thing, but
Right.
in fact they were,
Like
because
what?
that's I actually
Wait a
one of
minute.
my
Hold on. You said that the the Malcolm X.
the militants, they were pro feminist and they were pro gay liberation. As a matter of fact, in 1970, Huey P. Newton gave a speech on August 15th, a speech he gave in New York City, where he outlined the Black Panther Party's position on two emerging movements, the women's liberation movement and the gay liberation movement. I can actually just read you a couple of brief excerpts from that speech. This speech is from Huey P. Newton. Now, we all know Huey P. Newton is the founder of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. He says, whatever your personal opinions and insecurities are about homosexuality and the various liberation movements among homosexuals and women, and I speak of the homosexuals and women as oppressed groups. So Huey P. Newton considered gays and women feminists to be oppressed peoples. We should try to unite with them in a revolutionary fashion. Should we, Huey? I say, whatever your insecurities are, because as we very well know, sometimes our first instinct is to want to hit a homosexual in the mouth and want a woman to be quiet. We want to hit a homosexual in the mouth because we are afraid that we might be homosexual. So here Huey P. Newton is calling out his militant power to the people brothers, because if you are turning your back on the gay liberation movement, then that must mean that you are secretly harboring gay feelings within yourself that you haven't quite yet reconciled. And he says, and we want to hit the women or shut her up because we are afraid that she might castrate us or take the nuts that we didn't have to start with. So Huey Newton is saying, brothers, sit back. Let the radical militant feminists do their thing. Why you want to stand up to them? Are you insecure at the fact? Maybe, pretty much like a real man, the real man would go along with this and allow women to do this kind of thing here.
Oh my gosh, you have no idea how many things are going through my head right now. Like I didn't get to all of this in that video. Oh my gosh. Like I have so many thoughts that we're not gonna have time to we're gonna have to do this again because we're like
for sure. Wrap me up at any time, Quisha, because we can go on.
This
all
is
night.
insane.
Stop me when you want to.
Wait a minute. Okay, so
mhm.
I don't even know if I want to say that. I'm gonna say it, but I may cut this part out. I'm just gonna say, do you think that, because I've always kind of thought that Farrakhan
He was switch hitting. He was kind of
now him, but Farrakhan, because I always thought it was something weird about him.
I did a YouTube. Matter of fact, speaking of the Black Panther Party, guys, if you're interested, I'm gonna shamelessly plug myself. At my YouTube channel, I had a 2-part lecture where I talked about the Black Panther Party and how the Black Panther Party helped to usher in the era of so-called Black feminism. And I also recently did a video where I entitled "From Muslim to Marxist," and I talked about Malcolm X and his whole thing. And I briefly kind of went into some of the beliefs of the Nation of Islam in the beginning. But the Nation of Islam is an amalgamation of Christian Science, theosophy, a lot of late 19th century paganism, and this whole the zeitgeist of that particular time was this emerging philosophy known as the God within. See, if you don't know anything about the beliefs of the Nation of Islam, then I may be kind of talking crazy to you. But yeah, Farrakhan, he's a man of the left. Make no mistake about it. Just as Malcolm was a man of the left, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a man of the left. The man who taught Elijah Muhammad, Farad Muhammad, was also a man of the left. But these men were not only are they men of the left, but they're they're Marxists in disguise. When I say they're Marxists in disguise, I mean they're Marxists in disguise in that they promote the doctrine of dialectical materialism, and so did Malcolm X. Incessantly, I mean, militantly, he endorsed Marx's philosophy of dialectical materialism, but he did it in the guise of something that he called Islam. I don't even know if that quite addressed your question about Minister Farrakhan, but yeah,
Wow.
he's another. And
He
it's
was
just
done earlier.
one more sentence that I think will really drive the point home. You can go pull up the whole speech. Huey at one point says that, and what made them homosexual? Question mark. Perhaps it is a phenomenon that I don't understand entirely. Some people say that it is the decadence of capitalism. So the decadence of capitalism may have made them gay. Maybe, I don't know. He's playing devil's advocate. He goes on. This is not endorsing things in homosexuality that we wouldn't view as revolutionary, right? So, you talk to communists, they got revolutionary versus reactionary. You want to be revolutionary, not a reactionary.
Mhm.
So he's not endorsing things within the homosexual lifestyle that he wouldn't view as revolutionary, because it's okay to be gay as long as you're revolutionary. But there is nothing to say that a homosexual cannot also be a revolutionary. This is Huey. And maybe I'm injecting some of my prejudice by saying that, listen, now check this out. This is how he words this. And maybe I'm now injecting some of my own prejudice by saying even a homosexual can be a revolutionary. Quite the contrary. So what he's saying is, when I say that maybe a homosexual can be revolutionary, he says I'm showing my prejudice, because I'm saying they can be. Maybe they can. I don't know. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
that's his prejudice. Because in the
Mhm.
next sentence, he says quite the contrary. Maybe a homosexual is the most revolutionary. Now let that sink in.
It's intersectionality. That is intersectionality.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
because it's like, because the more the more labels you have on you, the more oppressed you are, the more revolutionary that you get to be, or that
That's
you
right.
automatically get to be. If you're a black, trans woman, whatever, yada yada, go down the line.
Right.
It's like you have the right to be more revolutionary.
Yeah. And
Yo, this
yeah,
is so crazy. This is so freaking wild.
and
Let
remember
me just
now.
okay. Let me try
Go
to
ahead.
like put this together in my head real quick. Okay, so basically, what you're saying is that it's not necessarily, and you correct me if I'm wrong. So queer, the LGBTQ, it they kind of, with the Civil Rights Act, they kind of was like, no, we're not really trying to feel that. The communists were like, yeah. But as time went on, and around the 70s when the sexual revolution happened, then it was like,
Mhm.
okay, well now we can kind of
Yeah.
embrace this thing. So that's pretty much when it started to really kind of
Mhm.
mesh itself together. They were bedfellows, if you would
Yeah.
say, but they weren't
Yeah.
open about it
Yeah.
until like the 70s, when it was like more
Yeah.
acceptable to
Yeah.
be
It's a trickle. It's not so, right.
yeah.
It takes time. You have to,
But
march slowly.
then in the 80s we have Kimberly Crenshaw that comes in, and
Mhm.
Derek Bell with critical race theory
Mhm.
and intersectionality, where now it's like wide open. And because I don't know if you, so Governor DeSantis, he just rejected AAP, African American Studies course, um because it had critical race theory and queer theory. And he was like, he had a press conference, he's like, now what the heck does an African American Studies course do? What does that have to do with queer theory? He's like, no, we're not doing that. I don't even think he may, because he's like actually like a pretty smart guy. I wonder if he even knows about all, like, because he's like, why is this here? Well, Governor, this is why it's that. This
That's
is
why
why
it's
it was
there.
in
Yeah.
there.
You got
Whoa, this
again.
is
Yeah.
so
You
wild.
have to expand the ranks of the proletariat. That's what you have to do. You have to expand the ranks of the proletariat. They're all the same. You just have to
Yeah.
simply find an oppressed group, find a marginalized group. Remember that Marx's dialectical materialism is it's like, and it's sort of like this. Okay, I know if the viewing audience, if you're familiar with Karl Marx, you may have heard of Friedrich Hegel.
Yes.
Friedrich Hegel was a huge influence on Marx. As a matter of fact, I took a quote from Chad O. Jackson's piece. This was in the New York Times, written in 1957, that stated that this is in respect to Dr. Martin Luther King, that he traded biblical bombast for sermons fusing Christianity, Hegelianism, and Gandhism or Gandhiism. Right. This is what
Who
the
is
New
this?
York Times said about King. That King fused Christianity, Hegelianism, which is right named after
Mark.
Friedrich Hegel, the man
Yeah.
who influenced Marx, and Gandhiism. So anyway, so Marx has
Wow.
this idea, this dialectical idea that in Hegel was not a leftist per se. You had two separate camps of Hegelians. You had what were called left-wing Hegelians and right-wing Hegelians.
Mm-hmm.
And Marx took Hegel's model to construct his own idea of the historical process, which he
Mm-hmm.
referred to as his historicism, because he thought he had history down to a science. Hence the opening lines of the Communist Manifesto,
Mm-hmm.
that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the existence of class struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dialectic, the struggle between two opposing positions, which is supposed to culminate in a synthesis of the thesis and antithesis, right, is how sort of man moves throughout history until he reaches this point of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have to, so you have to constantly find conflict
Mm-hmm.
until you reach the end of history, because the end of history, of course, is communism, right?
Right.
Which is preceded by the dictatorship of the proletariat, as they say, or the socialist state before you reach the communist state. But the end of history is communism, but the end of
Mm-hmm.
history is when there is no conflict. So
Right.
when you see a marginalized group, right, which they're at the margin, you have to bring the margin to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you bring the margin to the center, see, and here lies the problem with leftism, and which is why they quote unquote eat their own. Because once you identify an oppressed group, if you empower them, so called, then they become, in essence, the new bourgeoisie.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why there is never any stability when these nihilists get in
Mm-hmm.
control,
Yep.
because when you allow for stability to occur, what does stability bring? Stability brings hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And the mere existence of a hierarchy is indicative innately of exploitation, because
Yeah.
exploitation is the meta narrative of the left.
Yeah.
And so once you have identified an oppressed group and you shine all your attention on them, and you bring them into the fold of the mainstream, then they have now become the oppressor, and now you have to find someone else. This is
Hence,
why all my
hence,
power to the people, all my black militant men from back in the
uh-huh.
60s and the 70s. And now you wondering why 30, 40 years later, you can't find a suitable wife. And now you running around, following Andrew Tate and Kevin Samuels and this person and that person. Well, you are the reason why your women are so out of control. You ushered this in because you were out there raging against the white man. And
Mm-hmm.
then the black woman turned around and used that same Marxian methodology against you, and you had no defense for it because you too have embraced it.
Man, that is so good and so true. And I was gonna say, as these margins get bigger
You did,
now,
yeah.
like because before it was like the white, straight Christian man
Mhm.
who has now put on a wig and a dress and said, "Not so fast. I'm trans." So
Yep.
now I am fighting for my rights
Mhm.
too.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Just
And that's why the
totally.
pedophilia, all this stuff is creeping in,
Yeah.
because you have to find someone again who's outside of the mainstream of the society.
Yeah.
And you keep going until you reach the end of history, when society is completely classless. You see, when Marx talked about a classless society, what they call classical orthodox Marxism, or sometimes you hear it referred to as vulgar Marxism. Marx was just solely focused his attention on the means of production, right? But when we talk about queer, for example, queer simply means, right,
Like weird
anything
or
that is peculiar
abnormal.
or
Yeah.
abnormal,
Mm-hmm.
right? So anything that is outside the norm is considered queer.
Right.
I talked about her in my last YouTube upload, Gail Rubin. And for those of you who follow James Lindsay has a lot of interesting material out there on Gail Rubin as well.
I was literally just about to ask you if you follow James. He's a friend of mine. He was the first guest on my show.
Wow. No, I don't.
Yeah.
No, that's deep. That's
Yeah.
wow. So
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot of respect for James.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I feel like I'm in his company in some vicarious way.
Yeah.
'Cause
I was actually just I have this their first book
race
right here.
Marxism,
Yeah,
or was it what
cynical theories.
cynical theories? Yeah, cynical
Yeah.
theories. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so Gail Rubin and her idea of queer ideology, which I mean she is the founder of the queer ideology by many people's estimation. It's pretty much that that what we consider normal behavior or normal
Mhm.
sexual orientation is an example of bourgeois property.
Yep.
And
Wow.
so we have to, right, create this balanced ledger where if you like young children or whatever it is that you, right, is on par with heterosexual sex, not just heterosexual sex, but she breaks down sexuality in another hierarchical model where the the top of the pyramid of sexual oppression would be a man and a woman in a monogamous marriage. So that is the number one form of acceptable sexual behavior, according to Gail Rubin. Everything else is subservient to it. And the fact that there are other things. See, it's funny because Gail Rubin and people who think like her never ask themselves for 1 second, it would seem, why? Don't you think that there may be a reason why we don't allow adults to have sex with children? Maybe this exists for a reason. They never stop to ask themselves that question. Only thing that they are concerned with is the fact that there are people who have sexual attraction to minors and we marginalize them. And there isn't a valid reason why we marginalize them. We just do it because why? Because we're wicked, evil, imperialist, oppressive, capitalist, white male, hetero, blah, 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 blah,
Right.
cisgendered, all this nonsense.
Wow.
Right? And so again, you have to find you gotta get to the point where you gonna go so far down the trough. Now we talking about silly stuff like body positivity and fat shaming and all this nonsense.
And minor attracted people now.
Minor attracted persons,
Yeah.
MAPS,
Yeah.
or cross-generational encounters is what they're calling. It's not pedophilia, it's
Right.
cross-generational encounters. And so
Yeah.
again, this is what
So basically, so there
movement
is no boundary. There is no standard. It's anything goes. Do whatever you want to do. It's your thing. Do what you want to do. I can't tell you who to sock it to. You know, it's the same old trick from the beginning. Oh, you want to be like God, don't you? Oh, I know. I can show you how to do this. You don't have to abide by those rules. You know, you don't have to listen to what God says. Like, who is he? No, let me show you how to be like him.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what leftism is. It's why our friend James Lindsay, I don't know where he is in terms of his spirituality, because I think he considers himself to be a man of the left, but
He's an atheist.
he's an atheist. Yeah, I didn't want to say it because I
Yeah.
wasn't.
I mean, he says, but you know what? I saw a post from him.
He won't be for long.
I don't think so and James, holla at your girl if you need some guy. But I mean, you know what? James is funny enough. He's surrounded by a bunch of Christians, he's surrounded by a lot of believers, which is so funny. But it's never, talking with him. It's just it's never disrespectful. It's always, always all love. But I
It's
saw
all
him
love,
make a
yeah. But
post. I think
if I ever have the opportunity to meet him or speak to him, I might try
Well,
to evangelize
we'll,
it, you know. I don't know
we'll
if
try
I'm
to
qualified,
we'll try to
but
make
yeah,
that happen.
but
But
ultimately,
he said like I saw him say something like he was questioning, and I was like, "What?
listen,
Well,
listen. The the more and more he goes down, I mean, never mind going down a rabbit hole. I mean, James is in the pit, right? He's in there, you know.
yeah,
He's going to realize that, dude, like, he, this is a spirit. You know, again, this is a spiritual type of thing that he's
oh
dealing
yeah."
with. This is,
I think he's getting there. I really,
you
really
know,
do because we did a speaking event. This is last year, and we were it was at this point in time it was just me and him. We were just sitting. I was like, James, I gotta ask you. I said, how do you square macroevolution? I've just got to know. Like,
Mhm.
come on, like.
Right.
And he just gave me like the typical atheist rundown. I'm like, I'm not gonna press you, but
Yeah. Well, I
but
mean, you know, atheism begins where communism begins. Communism. See, you know, start from the outside and once again work your way backwards. You get to know the unknown by studying what is known. Now
mhm,
God is the unknowable. You may
mhm,
peek at it, you don't quite get it, and you'll never
right,
get it, not in this lifetime, but you can get a good sense of what
mhm,
lies beyond the veil when you study
yeah,
the known. You see, communism is just the political manifestation of spirit. It's atheism politically. It is
right,
the political manifestation of atheism. If
yeah,
you know that
mhm,
communism, I'm not trying to debate James Lindsay, but I'm
mhm.
saying if you know, and I don't, and not to say that I'm even qualified, but if you know that communism politically is wrong, then atheism philosophically must too be wrong.
Ooh,
Logic
ooh,
dictates that.
makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. And if you listen to well any atheists worth their salt who are honest, who are very, who are well studied, not like I can't do like Richard Dawkins, but if I'll say like Christopher Hitchens, if you listen to him,
Mhm.
and I think they both have this, but I like Richard Dawkins, he's just so disrespectful. I can't like
Yeah,
I
Richard
can't stand
Dawkins
him.
is terrible. I have some respect for Christopher Hitchens, of
Yeah,
course,
I do. So do I. And likewise, like James Lindsay,
and
but
James. Yeah,
Christopher Hitchens, and I'm not saying James is like this because I don't know, but Christopher Hitchens, there seemed to be a deeper thing there about his atheism. Like it was almost like he was mad at God. Not that he didn't think that God didn't exist, but more so that he was just pissed off with
though.
God, and not really so. I
Yeah,
just don't understand how this God could exist. So, yeah,
yeah.
that's just my two
I
cents
said
on
that. I said that earlier. I didn't say it quite like that, man. But that's what I was sort of getting at. That people know it's not that they don't. They're just angry about it.
that. Yeah.
It makes them upset because
Right,
I
right.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
again, it gives them perhaps this sense of feudal, like this sort of feudalism, if I could,
Feudalism.
not feudal, but futile. Like,
Yeah.
existence is like, well, what's the meaning if I was created so to be this perpetual subordinate to something
Yeah.
that is higher than me? Like, when is it my turn? When do
Mm,
I get my time when do I get my time to shine? And it's like,
yeah.
they don't. It's a hubris and an ego thing that they
And the
just
thing
can't
about it
accept.
is that we'll wrap this up now,
Okay.
but the thing about it is you you can look at your own life history though. Like it's like when do you get your time? You get your time every day, and we mess it up all the time. Like your own life, you don't even have to look at somebody else's life. Like I was saying earlier, you can literally take your own and realize you're not qualified to like run this thing by yourself because you I guarantee you've had some massive mess ups, massive. you
Hmm.
know, it just is what it is. It's just it just is what it is, which is why Christ was necessary. And
Yep.
so this has been a amazing conversation. This is
Thank you.
like this is all up my alley. I love these. First of all, I love to learn things that are new,
Mhm.
and something that I haven't quite delved into, and I'm still going to be continuing to look into Martin Luther King and these, quote unquote, notable figures that have shaped American history, because I think where we are as Americans and where this country is, and all of these people we have built up, who whose words, whose images, whose they have just massively shaped where we are today. And where we are today is a complete hot mess. Then yeah, I think we need to go and look at who exactly we have built up
Yes.
as figures that we need to continue to look up to. So would you tell everyone where they can find you and any projects and things that you have working on that you'd like to let
Yeah,
us
you
know
can
about?
find me at Teach 'em Chuck on YouTube, and also Teach 'em Chuck on Instagram. Those are my only two social media platforms at the moment. I'm just trying to build my social media profile, and hopefully there's a market for what I have to say. It can grow. Again, I'm not doing this for personal or any type of gain or anything like that. I was, like I said earlier, to start off, I was sort of pushed into this. I didn't even really, public speaking, and then it comes natural, but I'm kind of a low key, kind of a shy guy. I don't really like this kind of stuff, but fate, destiny calls, and God, I ain't gonna say that I'm sent from God or nothing like that. I'm not that crazy. I don't know that to be true, but when you feel like something needs to be said, you got to do something. You got to do something. You can't just sit back and watch your country fall apart, knowing you have young
Right.
children, and you go to bed every night wondering what kind of world you're leaving behind for them. It really does something to you. It'll make a warrior out of a coward in a heartbeat. So, but yeah, I just have those two social media profiles, and then um, some things. I'll let once again. Me and my buddy Chado Jackson, we've been doing a lot of talking. I don't want to let
Okay.
any cat out the bag, but just
All
know
right.
that there's an Uncle Tom 3 coming. Don't know when it will be released, but we got some time, because
Yeah.
part 2, people still chewing on that.
Yeah.
So Uncle Tom 3 is coming in the near future. Wink, wink. You may see your boy in it. We're talking about maybe putting together an anthology. He and I and some other writers doing some things. Maybe coming together and writing a book, perhaps. And so it's a lot of things. And so
Yeah.
that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. It's,
Well, that's a
mm,
whole heck of a lot. That's a lot, and that is
mm,
amazing. I
mm,
cannot wait
yeah.
to interview you guys, and
Yeah. And bring me back on any time, Keisha.
yeah,
Again, I'll prepared for this conversation. I got some things about Stanley Levison and some MLK quotes, and some things,
yeah,
some opinions of some other folks, like the one-time chairman of the Democrat Socialists of America. He had some things to say about Dr. King that I
mhm,
didn't get to. So there are a lot of stuff that we can revisit. So we gotta
yeah.
we gotta do this again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
And as I'm building the show, I hopefully the next time that we chat, it could be in person in my studio. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward
yeah. I would love to
to
come
that.
down to Florida, man.
Oh
Shoot.
yeah,
Book me a
I'm
ticket. I come
looking
down
forward to
there.
that.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All
So,
right.
well, thank you everyone for watching. Make sure you like this video, share this content. This is how we break the narratives. This is how we push good ideas, better ideas into culture so we can see a change, not just for us, but for our children. Make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Rumble, subscribe. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, wherever you listen, please make sure that you give us a 5-star rating. It really helps. I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.
Peace.